everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Emily Clark and I am the Community Services Manager at Quasi. If you're not familiar with Quasi, we are a nonprofit organization funded by the National Science Foundation to support the water science community. We do this in a number of ways. One way is by providing tools and software that facilitate data collaboration, and another is by providing education and outreach programs. And so today we are very excited to talk about a new program in partnership with Michigan Tech University. And so I'd like to introduce Dr. Luke Bowman and Dr. John Gierke from Michigan Tech to talk about the International Research Experience for Students in El Salvador program.
Thanks, Emily.
All right. Yeah,
I'm glad everybody could join us for the webinar today. I'm Luke, and this is John. And so we're going to just do a very brief sort of overview of who we are and who the project partners are, and talk a little bit about the International Research Experience for Students, give you guys a description of what we're going to undertake this coming summer, and describe a little bit of the profile of students that we're hoping to recruit for our first cohort this summer. We're going to talk a little bit about our schedule and some of the deadlines, but mostly wanted to open it up to question and answer. We felt like opening that up to you guys would be more beneficial to you and get us thinking about some of the things that we'll have to be considering over the next few months while we get all the logistics and everything organized for our departure in June. So just to introduce sort of who we are, you already met Emily from Quasi, the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science. John and I are here today. We also have Angie Carter, Carrie Henquinet from Social Sciences at Michigan Tech, Dr. Frank Liu is from Forestry, and Dave Watkins and Alex Mayer from Civil Environmental Engineering. We've partnered with Lutheran World Relief, which is a non-governmental organization and not-for-profit. Juan Francisco, Nelson, and Ralph are our in-country liaisons. They got a $3 million grant from a private foundation to work on climate change adaptation in the region where we propose to work in El Salvador. We're also reconnecting with colleagues with whom we've worked in the past at the University of El Salvador, not the campus that's in San Salvador, but the campus that's in the town of San Vicente, where we'll be doing some of our training activities that we'll discuss later. We've also reconnected with some of our colleagues at the Ministry for Environment and Natural Resources, Eduardo and Manuel Diaz, who work more in the geosciences aspect of this ministry. So the sort of overarching 30,000-foot view of the International Research Experience for Students, our idea is that we wanted to couple scientists and students that had interdisciplinary research backgrounds and interests with the type of work that's being done in developing countries. And this is why we partnered with Lutheran World Relief. We've worked with them in the past and doing very important work on climate change adaptation in the dry corridor of El Salvador and in the other countries of Central America and Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Our focus will be in El Salvador. This is very participatory research, so very community-based and informed by the members of the communities and our in-country partners with whom we'll be working. And we're mostly focusing on hazards that are posed by water scarcity and flooding. So as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing mostly on agricultural community adaptations, working very closely with local farmers and trying to address these extreme hydrometeorological events that are occurring in El Salvador. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I dropped this map in here of El Salvador, and after I did that, I realized that they haven't even listed El Salvador on this map. It's this tiny country that's sandwiched between Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It's the smallest of the Central American countries, but the most highly densely populated country. And these are the regions where Lutheran World Relief are working. All of the municipalities that are highlighted in blue. And we have chosen during our visit, John, Emily, and a couple of other people involved with the project were down in El Salvador visiting with our colleagues at the University of El Salvador and with Lutheran World Relief to identify the communities where we'll be working this coming summer. So we'll be here in the municipality of California and in this municipality of Jucuapa. This is a volcanic region of El Salvador. There's no active volcanoes where we'll be working. But very beautiful landscape, a lot of topography. So this is the region where we're going to be working. It's the most safe out of all of the places where Lutheran World Relief is working, and it's very close to the University of El Salvador. This is the Department of San Vicente, and the university is about here, about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes away. So our summer 2020 cohort is going to focus mostly on water availability and access to water. We're also looking at some of the socio-cultural dimensions of the challenges that community members face and that researchers face when working on the ground in El Salvador. So we'll look at gender and power relationships, try to identify some of the root causes that make people vulnerable to changing and variable rainfall, weather, and climate patterns, and the factors that create inadequate or limited access to water within the communities where we'll work. We might also install some hydrometeorological monitoring equipment, but this is still undecided. And we hope that the results from each of the cohorts for the next 3 years will highlight some of the problems and challenges, as well as develop some solutions that we can present to communities and work with communities to design collaboratively. So some of the highlights, we already have existing strong partnerships with institutions in El Salvador, and through the work we'll do with these 3 cohorts, we hope to strengthen those partnerships. We'll have a 2-week-long intense workshop prior to our field activities where we'll learn some very specific research methods that we'll employ in the 2 communities. Obviously, there's an international research immersion component with this experience. You'll get to experience Salvadoran culture and Spanish language, practice some community development and capacity building skills. There is the potential that this could become part of a thesis or dissertation for many master's or PhD students that have research topics that overlap or intertwine with our work in El Salvador. You're going to grow professionally. We do have the potential to create some long-term lasting impacts for our partners in El Salvador. And we're going to cover all of your travel costs, and you'll get a $2,000 stipend after completing the 8-week-long experience. And the dates that we're shooting for are June 15th to August 7th, roughly. Those are subject to change, but that's the window that we're looking at.
Second, can you back up just one? I'd like to just add, well, first of all, I really want to appreciate all of you for participating in this and for your interest. We're really glad to see such great interest in it. I wanted to mention Luke has worked almost 10 years in El Salvador on hazard risk reduction. So he worked in the San Vicente region on hazards posed by volcanic deposits on steep slopes and their vulnerability to mud and debris flows in extreme rain events. And so this area that we're going to work in is new to him, and of course new to all of you. But the people that we work with are people that Luke has worked with for 10 years or more. And we're really grateful to have the opportunity to work with them again because we like doing so. And then the idea of the work that comes out of this summer being part of a thesis or dissertation, we would be glad if that happened, but it's not a requirement. So the main purpose here is the international research experience and the skill development. And then along those lines, during that 2-week workshop, about half of that is going to be practicing those skills in a small community next to San Vicente. And so that's where the skills will be honed in the hands-on activities. And then from there, we'll go to the communities where the real research will be conducted for the remainder of the time.
So it may seem a little vague or unstructured if you've looked at the COASI website and seen the IRES webpage or seen our flyer. The work that we'll be conducting this coming summer is very interdisciplinary in nature, and that's why in our advertisement we're looking for a very broad, diverse background of students for year one, because the way the project is designed is that year one will help us understand the reality of the dynamics of how people access water in the communities in El Salvador. And so we want the results and the data that we obtain, our experience this summer, to help inform us for how we proceed and design our approaches for cohorts 2 and 3 in 2021 and 2022. So that aspect, I think, is really enriching for this project, that we aren't arriving to communities or approaching our in-country partners with preconceived solutions without fully understanding the complexity of the challenges. And so that's the nature of this summer's work. So moving on to eligibility and some of the desirable attributes that we are seeking, and by the looks of the applications that are already in proposal space, I think we're meeting our goal there. Per NSF requirements, we can only accept U.S. citizens or permanent residents or green card holders. Students can have traveled abroad or studied abroad or done Peace Corps and lived abroad. All of those things are great previous experience that would strengthen an application, but international experience is not a requirement. You do not have to have already been abroad or be fluent in Spanish, but the thing that would disqualify your application is if you've done international research. So you can have studied abroad, but you cannot have done research abroad.
And that's because NSF is using this funding to try and promote more U.S. scientists to have international experience or skills to be able to work in a global setting.
You also have to be enrolled in a graduate program or accepted for and committed to enrolling in a fall semester. So I've received this question a couple of times now, where graduating seniors are currently applying to grad schools. They may have been accepted but haven't committed to one or the other. Still, we encourage you to apply. You are still eligible, even though you won't be starting a master's or PhD until fall 2020. We are seeking students that have some Spanish skills. If you're fluent, that's great. If you speak no Spanish at all, that does not disqualify you. We fully recognize that we are going to bring some students that have no Spanish background. So even if you don't speak Spanish, that's not a deal breaker. Please apply. We're going to have a range of Spanish proficiency in our team this year.
Yeah, so those of you that do not speak Spanish should know that we will have people that are fluent participating, and enough of them that you will get you'll be able to have a true experience, even though you won't be able to speak Spanish yourself.
I already mentioned how we're seeking students that have interdisciplinary research interests. We also want to attract students and participants to our team that are going to have a concern for the well-being of others, that are flexible and adaptable, willingness to work outside one's comfort zone. The research and fieldwork environment in El Salvador will be challenging, but it won't be impossible. We just are seeking people that understand that plans may change day to day or hour to hour, depending on factors that we can't plan well for. And so students that exhibit a willingness to be adaptable and flexible are going to be high on our list. this is our schedule, sort of roughed out. We have an application deadline for January 31st. And we hope to review applications over the 2 weeks following that and let people know by February 17th whether they've been accepted into the program. And then we're probably going to ask students to commit within a couple, 2 or 3 weeks after notifications go out on February 17th. That way, in March, we can begin planning for our pre-departure activities. So throughout March, April, and May, we'll have 4-ish meetings that we'll do virtually, and there will be some activities, some readings, a couple of things to do that will prepare all of us to be more successful once we arrive to El Salvador in mid-June. So we'll get to El Salvador around June 13th, 14th. The 15th through the 26th, we're going to be in San Vicente, housed at an NGO compound that has, it's essentially a hotel with conference rooms, internet, a restaurant, and it's only 2 blocks away from the University of El Salvador, where our partners in the Agricultural Sciences Department are housed. Then from there, we'll drive about an hour and a half to Alegria, and that's where our hub will be. It's a mountain community on a volcano, very touristy, quaint, peaceful, safe, pleasant, 10 degrees cooler than San Vicente, which everybody will appreciate. And from there, that's where we'll go out and do group work for 5 weeks in the communities we've identified. Then we'll wrap up in San Vicente for a couple days, present the results of our work, and then around August 7th, everybody will head back home. So that's our general overview. John and I and Emily were really excited that we have seen so much interest in the program. We want to open it up to questions. Just because we know that the nature of the project seemed pretty open from our description on COASI's website and from our flyer. Maybe you met with us at GSA or AGU. So if you could enter your questions in the chat function, maybe Emily can help us facilitate the question and answer period.
And then
definitely.
Okay. I'd like to add, you know, we're going to let people, if every application that is currently in the system gets completed, and then we'll have more applications than we'll be able to accept. However, our plan is to make those initial offers using the criteria that Luke outlined. But there will almost certainly be people that we'd like to have that we just don't have the room. So we'll have a sort of an alternate list as well. And so sometime after, you know, a few weeks or a month after the initial offers are made, then we will, if we have some cancellations, we'll be seeking people on that alternate list. And then there's also the next summer as well. So you'll have those that apply and aren't selected will be also considered for the subsequent summers.
There have been several potential applicants that have contacted me, and as I've described the nature of the year one, they've decided that they may be better suited for year 2 or 3, and so we're already sort of pre-recruiting through these types of outreach efforts for summers 2 and 3.
Awesome. So we have one question in the chat box right now that says, with the first year being focused on interviews and community participation, what kind of work would those that don't speak Spanish be participating in?
So one thing that I have not yet discussed with John or Emily is that Lutheran World Relief has requested that a contingent of our students help do some evaluation on 2 current projects that they're working on installing now. Those involve rainfall harvesting systems on people's rooftops, and the construction of mini reservoirs to store water during droughts. These are sort of pilot programs that they will have done by the end of April, and they would like our team to do an evaluation of the effectiveness of those two efforts, not only from sort of a technical functionality background, but also how communities perceive those interventions. And this is something that the social scientists, Angie and Carrie on our team, think is going to be a great way for our students to have a foot in the door in these communities with a more directed project.
And then the other thing I'll mention is that normally in interview work, the answers are recorded either on tape or recordings, or they're written down, and so often, depending on the translation skills of the person writing, and sometimes they're recorded in English by a person that understands Spanish. If it's recorded in Spanish and then transcribed into Spanish, then the first thing we do is translate it, and then that's when the processing happens. So those that are not fluent in Spanish can still participate in organizing the data, coding entries, and then reviewing it and coming up with interpretations and conclusions from that. So participating in the English translated results that we collect, that get collected.
And I think we envision that at the end of each day, and maybe over each weekend, the group would come back together and revisit the topics that were uncovered that day and discuss them as a group in English, so that everybody is on the same page moving throughout the summer experience. And the feedback and input we get from the non-Spanish speakers about the topics that we uncover on a daily basis will be vital.
Yeah, so if someone has a lot of experience in, for example, in ethnography, but can't speak Spanish, they're still going to be able to contribute a lot of value to the planning of the work and the reviewing of the results and adapting it as the weeks progress.
And if we have a hydrologist who's fluent in Spanish but has no background conducting an interview or a focus group, then that's where that ethnographer will be able to, the skills will complement one another. That's why we're hoping for a diverse background in this summer's cohort.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple more questions. What kind of resources and support will be available in the rural areas, especially in terms of safety?
So in July of this past year, we were there and we met with the mayors of each of the 2 towns where we'll be working, and they've committed their support to our team's arrival this summer. We've already specifically chosen the 2 communities that were identified as being the safest by Lutheran World Relief. Out of the 50 communities that they're working in, we are in the safest 2 on their list. We'll notify police when we get there or before we get there that we're coming. And we will, especially in San Vicente, we've been staying at the accommodations for 10 years now.
And that's secured as a guard and restricted access. And then we have plans that when to go out in the communities, that we'll only be going out in groups and accompanied by people that have experience in those communities or working in El Salvador.
We're also going to completely avoid San Salvador. The airport is about 40 minutes outside of the city, and we will not even have to drive through San Salvador to get to San Vicente. So There are many beautiful things to see in San Salvador and fun things to do, but there's certainly places that you want to avoid. And our approach is just to avoid the city altogether.
If you have some more specific, the person that asked that question or people that have that same question, if there's some more specific things you'd like to know, feel free to put that in the chat box, because we know that that's a concern and we want to try and address as much of that as possible.
Okay, thanks. Or if you want to talk in more detail, you can reach out to John and Luke directly, and I think they would be happy to speak with you on the phone.
I don't know, Emily, if you would want to just chime in for a second about your experience, having never been down there, and your mother sending you news links before your departure, and then what your perceptions were.
Yeah. So it was my first time visiting El Salvador, and I really didn't know what to expect because there is a lot of information in the news, and unfortunately, it's a lot of not very good stories. But I had a wonderful time. I felt very safe. Luke is fluent in Spanish, and so it was very easy for us to get around. Everyone that we met was very welcoming, super nice. I never had a moment where I felt unsafe or uncomfortable. And the communities that we were in are just beautiful. And the people that we had worked with were excited to meet us. And so it was a really lovely experience. And it definitely, any hesitation or nervousness that I felt going into the trip was completely alleviated when I got there. And so it was really nice. Definitely surprising, considering, like I said, some of the things that you hear, but it was a really wonderful experience. So we do have a couple more questions in the chat box. So what counts as having previous international research experience?
So we're still uncertain about how NSF's going to check up on us on that. But if you've gone abroad and observed research, I don't think that counts. What we're looking for is people that have been active in research. And so, how long of that research activity, I think we should be talking about, if you've been involved with it for more than a week, that experience is more than a week, certainly that would probably preclude you from participating. If you're not sure what you did would count as research, I think it'd be best to just submit to Luke and I a description of that, and we'll sort of address it one-on-one on case-by-case basis. If you help someone, like you carried their equipment for them, I don't consider that research. So research is collecting data, processing it, interpreting it. So if your research experience was just as a lackey or someone that hauled things around, then that would not preclude you.
Great. And Luke, you're going to go back to that slide for a minute that has your contact information on it. Yeah, so here's again the website that's on Quasi's website with additional information and Luke's email address if you do have any follow-up questions that aren't answered during this presentation. We have one more question in the chat box right now. If anyone else has a question that they'd like to ask, go ahead and type it in. So it was mentioned that travel costs are being covered. Does that include the cost of living for the 2 months spent in El Salvador, or only the actual travel to and from?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. No, we have it budgeted. We have funds for the air travel costs. All the accommodations will be covered. There'll be group accommodations. That is, people won't have their own bedroom. And then the modest food costs, it's very easy to have modest food costs for awesome food in El Salvador, and so that'll be covered. There will be sufficient money in there in the sort of per diem allowance to cover even the cost of laundry, and a phone card, I think we had talked about, and then health insurance for while you're abroad for that period, for those that don't have it.
Yeah, but there shouldn't be any costs.
Right, in the end. I mean, you might have to fork out something at some point, but get reimbursed.
Yeah.
And then the stipend is above that.
Okay, thanks. How many applicants will be accepted and how large will the group be?
So our target is 10, and that's what we have budgeted. And so it won't be any larger than 10 in the first cohort. And then like I mentioned, there will be an alternate list. So because this is our first year, we're not sure, we want to make sure that we have the right size group. So we're anticipating more than 10 people will be acceptable. So we'll have some on this alternate group in case someone has to cancel. And so we'll be communicating with those people all along just to keep them abreast of, the level of certainty that we'll have a full group. And that cohort size of 10 is the same every year. So 2021, 2022. If we have a cohort less than 10, then we're looking at either making larger cohorts in 2021 and 2022, or extending the project for one more summer and having a fourth cohort, depending on. So the budget though is for 30 students over 3 years.
Okay.
So
Oh, go ahead.
just to sort of piggyback off of that, one thing we're considering, I mean, of a cohort of 10, if 2 people decide once we're down there, or 3 people, that wow, this really isn't for me, then we've taken that opportunity away from 3 other applicants that we would have accepted otherwise, and we've spent a lot of money getting you down there for your air travel. That's why one of the reasons why the $2,000 stipend is after you complete the 8 weeks. But when we're reviewing applications, we're also going to be thinking about that personal statement and how you can describe yourself in a way that makes us believe that you're going to be able to stick it out in El Salvador and sometimes challenging conditions for 8 weeks.
In amongst a group with some very experienced people.
Right.
And caring people.
Right.
That are partnered with people that we know very well, who also care for the well-being of all of us.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And so to clarify, previous experience in an IRES will not be accepted, is that correct?
That's right. If a person's already participated in IRES, then they're not eligible. Because that, by nature, that international research experience, yes.
All right, so that is the end of the questions that I see in the chat box. Do you have anything else you want to say in closing?
Well, again, I should have thought of that question beforehand. We should have practiced that, Emily. We thought we'd run out of time before we got to that. So we're really pleased with the amount of interest this has generated. We worried about that. We also, Luke and I have been doing work with students in Central and South America for a couple of decades now, and we have a lot of comfort in doing that, yet we're not complacent. That is, we have had a variety of experiences, and so we hope you feel comfortable in considering this. We've picked a really awesome spot. These pictures that you are seeing were all from our trip last July. And so there are pictures of students in here, and you saw Emily in one or two of them, me in a couple. We don't take pictures of Luke for obvious reasons if the video's on. But it is a really nice arrangement that we have been configuring. There's still some things we need to figure out, but we're really happy about the prospects of this experience for students who have never been abroad before in a research capacity.
And I will add, I mean, the first question about what measures we're taking for safety, that is our #1 concern. All of the logistics and planning that we're doing, it's because that is our #1 priority, to keep all of us safe. And it's true that not a lot of good news gets to the US about El Salvador, but there are some indications that things in El Salvador are on the upswing. I think last October or November was the first month without a single murder, which is the first time since the Civil War ended in 1992. When I lived there, it was about, well, it was worse. The new president, he's a 37-year-old millennial. He took power in June, and 93% of the population is supportive of the work he's doing and the trajectory of the country. So there have been some articles written about how El Salvador could be considered the most stable Latin American country if you based it on how the public feels about their government. So he's taken some real concrete steps to improve safety and security. That being said, we're still taking every precaution we can in our planning and activities for this coming summer. But when you meet resistance from your parents or family or partner about the safety and security, you might do a little deeper digging and find some of the positive news that's coming out of El Salvador.
I'll also add that too, that there will be some preparatory activities that we'll be doing online in advance of June 13th for those that are selected and on the alternate list. Now, it won't be onerous. We're envisioning essentially like 4 sort of meetings like this where we go over additional, more specific issues related to travel and accommodations, more specific things related to the research work, and so on.
Great. So we have a couple of questions that are coming in now, which is great. I will say just before we address those, again, visit the Quasi website that's on the screen now for additional information, including the application instructions. And applications are due on January 31st, so that's a week from today. It's a pretty straightforward application, but it does require a letter of support from an advisor. So if you haven't started an application yet, I would recommend checking that out as soon as possible, but there's still plenty of time to get it in. There's also Luke's email address on the screen. If you have any additional questions after this webinar and you'd like to follow up with him directly. So here's a question: if there are any lingering questions about what counts as international research, is it best to address it by email or on the application? And I would say maybe reach out via email.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that it would be better to address up front. And then another question: will there be any tuition or enrollment requirements?
There won't be. We are not offering this for course credit. That NSF wouldn't allow us to pay for the grant to pay for tuition, and so it would be just make it cost prohibitive to do that if we offered it for credit. And so we're not doing that. We can write letters of, of explanation what a person did if their own institution wanted to grant it the experience in lieu of credit. And we'll be happy to work with people on that.
Okay, great. So that's all I have over here. So do Luke or John, do you have anything else to add?
No, not me.
All right.
Real quick, Emily, in the application, we've requested that students submit a letter of support from their advisor. Is this a letter of recommendation or just that the advisor is aware and is permitting their student to go?
I would say both, because we want the advisor to comment on the student's capability to participate in the research activities, and then their willingness to let them go on this if they otherwise have expectations of them working on their research. Now, if one of you, so that this does bring up a new thing, if one of you is trying to finish this summer and you're in the throes of writing, it is very unlikely that you will have enough time to write like after hours during this experience and participate fully in the experience. And so I would discourage you from applying if you're trying to finish this summer, unless you've already defended and you're just working on revisions to your thesis or dissertation, and you're continuing you are a grad student still this summer, then that would still be appropriate. And you won't be able to take online courses while you're abroad with this, because the internet is just too unreliable. High-speed internet needed for online courses, it's just too unreliable, and our schedule is going to be too sort of non-uniform, and it'd be really hard to plan. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You will have internet every day, but you just won't have internet that you can download big files or do a lot of video conferencing.
All right. Would you mind going to the last slide quickly? So this is just a shameless plug for Quasi. If you are not familiar with us, I encourage you to visit the Quasi website. You're going to go there anyway when you click on that link to learn more about the IRES program. And if you're interested in programs like this and learning more about what we have going on, I encourage you to sign up for our e-newsletter so that you can stay informed. Particularly if you're thinking that maybe this isn't the right time for you to participate, but you'd like to participate in the following program next year. So thank you very much, Luke and John, for your time this afternoon. This was a great presentation, a lot of good information, and thank you all for attending. If you have any additional questions, I would recommend reaching out to Luke directly or visiting that link on the Quasi website to learn more.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. You did an awesome job organizing this.
Thank you. And happy Friday. Have a great afternoon.